So I was browsing news articles today when I came across one that had been shared entitled Toxic Masculinity: Why Aren't We Talking About This Epidemic and Its Role in Violent Crime by Emily Price on xoJane.com. It was posted a day ago, and I can't believe the amount of misinformed bullshit in the article, as well as the fact it was actually published. Essentially, the author talks about the so-called toxic masculinity involved in the recent mass murder in Orlando, where 49 people were killed. She states, "The less discussed and equally important factor is toxic masculinity. Most commentary fails to make explicit the role of maleness." I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm going to answer 3 questions the author asks. She states, "Before you or I knew any details of the mass shooting in Orlando, for example, we had already correctly assumed that the shooter was a man. We assume this because there is, statistically, a more than 98% chance that a person committing mass violence using a gun is male. We have to ask the hard questions. What is it about masculinity that creates perpetrators of these crimes? Why is it men who commit them? Why are men predominantly the shooters, rapists, or perpetrators of hate crimes?" And those are very interesting questions, which is why I find it sad that the author is not asking them in good faith. They're rhetorical. She doesn't want to know the reason, because she's found a reason: toxic masculinity.
Were it so easy.
To simply blame so-called toxic masculinity for a crime so complicated, so difficult to understand, so senseless, with so many possible risk factors, is naive at best and malicious at worst. It makes a mockery of all those men and women who work in the fields of forensic psychology, neurology, psychiatry, and neuroscience, who spend years studying violent criminals and the numerous complex risk factors involved. Anyway, in regards to the author's first question, the biopsychosocial model is used when considering the factors that contribute to mass murder. Masculinity is not one of them. To ask why masculinity creates perpetrators of these crimes is to reveal your own ignorance. But we'll go over the actual risk factors in a little bit. As for the author's other questions, let's see why men are much more likely than women to be the perpetrators of violent crime.
Why are women less violent than men? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the structure of our brains. Dr. Reuben Gur is a neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania.
Differences between men and women were interesting to me for as long as I can remember. Growing up, you wonder about the other sex. Do they feel the same way? Do they think the same way?
To understand the underlying differences between men and women, Dr. Gur starts by studying their behavior.
If someone asked me, where do you see the biggest difference, I would point to physical aggression. That's the one behavior that makes us look very different. Just open this morning's paper or look at this morning news on the TV. If we're talking about physical aggression, chances are that it was done by men.
Statistics show that 93% of murders are committed by men. To identify why men and women have different levels of aggression, Dr. Gur scanned the brains of 57 women and 59 men with an MRI and focused on 2 regions of the brain.
The 2 important regions with regard to emotion regulation are the amygdala and the orbital frontal area.
These regions are responsible for regulating emotion.
The amygdala is the part of the brain that is very sensitive to threat. It basically takes all the information that comes into your brain and makes one decision. Is that threatening or is that not threatening?
The orbital frontal region reads that signal and decides how to respond. By comparing these 2 regions, Dr. Gur believes he can see what makes men more violent than women. He found that the brains of men and women were nearly identical, except for one startling difference. the orbital frontal region.
That part is relatively smaller in men than in women. So if you just take the volume of the orbital frontal and you measure it in a sample of men and a sample of women, we look like we come from two different species. Men have less capacity to inhibit an impulse to attack or to perform a physical act of aggression.
Because women have larger orbital frontal regions, Dr. Gurr believes they are more capable of controlling aggression than men.
So when the amygdala sends a command, attack, the man will have less orbital frontal tissue available to modulate that specific urge, and it will therefore be less likely to inhibit that tendency and may end up attacking another person.
That clip is from an episode of the TV program Most Evil, in an episode on murderous women, which is actually really interesting, and I've left a link to the full episode in the description if you'd like to watch the entire thing. So there's our first possible reason for the difference. The brains of men and women differ neurobiologically. And what's interesting is though men have been shown to be more aggressive than women, they are also more likely to be the targets of displays of aggression and provocation. A study showed that when provocation is controlled for, sex differences in aggression are greatly reduced. The authors argued that this shows that gender role norms play a part. However, this study predates more accurate neurological scanning, so this could maybe also lend support to the findings of neurobiological sex differences. As for other reasons, testosterone has been theorized to play a role in the sex differences in crimes. Studies conducted have found direct correlation between testosterone and dominance, especially among the most violent criminals in prison, who had the highest testosterone levels. Another possible explanation is evolutionary psychologist Mark Van Voot's male warrior hypothesis, which states that men have evolved to be more aggressive and group-oriented in order to gain access to more resources, territories, mates, and to acquire higher status. Director of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Nebraska, Candace Bettencourt, has also stated that some research supports the idea that males are more likely than females to develop negative attributions of blame that are external in nature. That is, the cause of my problems is someone else or some force outside of me, and this translates into anger and hostility towards others. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to develop negative attributions of blame that are internal in nature. That is, the cause of my problems is some failing of my own. I didn't try hard enough, I'm not good enough. As you can see, the studies in this area are numerous and there are plenty of hypotheses. These are just a selection of them. I don't think there's any true consensus as to the cause or causes. There may not ever be. Human psychology is rather fickle like that. Probably the most concrete evidence you'll get is in neurobiological difference, because you can at least observe those. So obviously, though the majority of violent offenders may be men, there are only a small proportion of males who commit violent crime. And of the thousands of incidents of homicide in a given year, mass murder only accounts for about 1%. And as much as the author seems to want it to be true, masculinity is not a factor in whether someone will become a mass murderer. Human beings are not so simple. The factors contributing to mass murder are broad and have to be approached with the biopsychosocial model, as I mentioned earlier. These factors are outlined in the article on mass murder in the Journal of Psychiatric Clinics of North America. Factors common to mass murder include extreme feelings of anger and revenge, lack of an accomplice in adult mass murder, feelings of social alienation, and planning and organizing the offense. In a detailed case study of 5 mass murderers who were caught before they were killed, several common traits and historical factors were found. The subjects had all been bullied or isolated as children, turning into loners who felt despair over being socially excluded. They were suspicious, resentful, grudge holders who demonstrated obsessional or rigid traits. Narcissistic and grandiose traits were present, along with the heavy use of externalization as a way of coping. They held a worldview of others being rejecting and uncaring. As a result, they spent a great deal of time feeling resentful and ruminating on past humiliations. These ruminations invariably evolved into fantasies of violent revenge. Offenders seemed to welcome death, even perceiving it as bringing them fame with an aura of power. Biologic factors include possible brain pathology and psychiatric illnesses, such as depression and psychosis. Psychological factors include negative or frail self-image, strong sense of entitlement, and vulnerability to humiliation. Social factors include social isolation or alienation, being bullied, and marital or financial loss. Given the scarcity of research seen clarifying the spectrum of mass murder, it is difficult to draw conclusions beyond the hypothesis that it is caused by a complex interaction between Axis 1 and Axis 2 disorders, traumatic life events, and precipitating factors. And this is the conclusion you'll ultimately come to when you're researching serial murder or mass murder. The making of someone so violent who commits such awful and heinous crimes is ultimately a complex interplay of different combinations of factors, with individual difference playing a key role. It isn't a satisfying conclusion, I'm sure, but it's a far better one than toxic masculinity is the cause, because it respects the reality of human psychology. And as an aside, the author states that there has been a huge amount of discussion regarding Omar Mateen's ability to buy a gun, but comparatively little has been said about his history of domestic violence. Robert Deere, who committed the Planned Parenthood shootings in Colorado in late 2015, also had a history of domestic abuse. As it turns out, domestic violence is a major predictive factor in these types of shootings. The crimes of domestic violence and rape are under-prosecuted, and the attackers routinely go free or receive light punishment, yet we are collectively stunned when those same violent people manifest their aggression on a larger, bloodier scale. Of course, in general, the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour, but although past violence could be seen as a risk factor, it is most certainly not a predictive factor. An absolutely minuscule number of those who commit domestic violence go on to commit mass murder. It is not even listed in the risk factors. And that is probably why people are so stunned when it occurs. And I'd love to know the author's sources for these assertions. And ultimately, everyone, here we see that there isn't such simple answers to life's mysteries. If there were, psychologists would be out of a job. Anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to see future videos. All references are cited in the description along with a link to the article. I'll see you next time.